Hello and welcome back to the unofficial Black Lamb and Gray Falcon audiobook companion. I am your travel guide, James Snyder. In this episode, we'll outline the first chapter, the prologue, as Rebecca West relates her first recollections of Yugoslavia. Rebecca West begins her book and her journey justifying this eccentric visit to her husband, Henry Andrews, who she discovers is already asleep in the neighboring wagon lee. It is spring 1937. Alone with her thoughts, she recalls, the first time I ever spoke the name Yugoslavia, and that was only 2.5 years before, on October the 9th, 1934. At that time, she was recovering from surgery in a London hospital. By chance, she learns from a radio broadcast that King Alexander I of Yugoslavia was assassinated while on a state visit to Marseille in southern France. As the king left the quay, the killer approached Alexander's car and shot him 4 times with a semi-automatic pistol. The fatal round pierced the king's torso. The French foreign minister, Louis Barthou, who had accompanied the king, picked up a ricochet and later died in hospital. The assassin, a Bulgarian revolutionary named Vlado Chernozemski, was cut down by a French gendarme and beaten to death by the crowd in the street. Several others were wounded in the ensuing pandemonium. It was the first assassination captured in motion pictures. This report jolted West's memory of an earlier Balkan assassination, that of the Austrian Empress Elizabeth in 1898, when West was a girl. Then 60 years old, Elizabeth was traveling incognito in Geneva, Switzerland, when her hotel tipped off a newspaper to her presence. An Italian, Luigi Lucchini, was in town planning to kill Prince Philippe, Duke of Orléans, the pretender to the French crown, who had not actually come to Geneva. Instead, Lucchini attacked Elizabeth, who was with her lady-in-waiting and preparing to embark on a boat at the lakeside. Lucchini stabbed Elizabeth in the chest with a sharpened file and ran off. Elizabeth, who initially thought she had merely been knocked down, boarded the lake boat. Her tightly corseted dress slowed and hid, but did not stop the internal hemorrhage. She collapsed on the boat and died shortly afterwards. Both crowns were important figures in their day, and both assassins represented revolutionary movements au courant in their time. The Empress was admired for her intelligence and beauty, and her death was publicly mourned, much like the death of Diana Spencer in 1997. Elizabeth's assassin was an anarchist, an ideology that drew as much alarm at the fin de siècle as the self-styled revolutionaries of the Red Army faction and the Symbionese Liberation Army in the 1970s. Alexander, descended from rootless Serbian aristocracy, had been king of Yugoslavia for barely 5 years. He became a target of the internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. If this appears confusing because Chernozemski was Bulgarian, it won't be the last time. Chernozemski remains a controversial figure in both Bulgaria and Macedonia. To an observer in the 21st century, these events appear obscure, their connections tenuous. What could possibly link a stabbing in 1898 Geneva and a shooting in 1934 Marseille? They were, in fact, singular moments in the advance of the most disruptive political movement in European history. The abandonment of hereditary monarchy as a system of rule and government in favor of republicanism and democratic parliaments. World War I accelerated this collapse by breaking up the German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires. World War II would further liberate nations, move borders, and fatally weaken the remaining empires of France, the United Kingdom, and Japan. The only royalty to survive 1945 would retain ceremonial titles only. World War II would finish what a long string of assassinations had started. But in the late 1930s, with the Second War not yet in prospect, West was reaching back to understand what would happen to her, her country, and Europe in the coming years. To West, the revolutionaries, national movements, and assassins demonstrated not a violence unique to this small corner of the world. Violence was, indeed, all I knew of the Balkans, she admits, but the ruin and misery empires impose while dominating subject nations. She is keen enough to foresee that the cruelty loosened by empire and exacerbated by the unaccountable political organizations that opposed them seeded the ground for state terror and fascism. Luciani has got on well in the world, she writes, but now Luciani is Mussolini. Luciani, a bastard abandoned as an infant and raised in orphanages and foster homes, took out his individual rage on the political system. But this did not make it legitimate, West writes. His offense is that he made himself dictator without binding himself by any of the contractual obligations which civilized man has imposed on his rulers in all creditable phases. This cancellation of process in government leaves it an empty violence that must perpetually and at any cost outdo itself, for it has no alternative idea and hence no alternative activity. In addition to her mordant summation of fascism's appeal and agenda, West demonstrates a much more sophisticated historical understanding of actual events than she is later given credit for. The original sin, in her mind, was European imperialism that sought to divide and conquer, setting the weak off against one another, rather than their mutual oppressor, Rome. That Cain slew Abel was the logical, if not inevitable, endpoint.